In this video, I'm going to show you 3 ways to add color to your etchings. The first method that I'm going to start with is the a la poupee inking method, which is basically just inking the plate with different colors and trying to blend them as best as possible so that they look cohesive and not super blotchy. The most easiest way to add color to your etchings is, of course, just inking the plate with another color ink, but this is a way to use color strategically to create emphasis or add a little bit of color to a certain area. The second method I will show you is the chine colle method, and this is a way to add spot colors to etchings, and you can make it as complicated as you would like. This is a way to add color to the entire background of your image by cutting a piece of Japanese paper that's super thin with an adhesive on the back that's the same size of your plate. I like to make my chine colle a little bit more complicated by cutting out designs that are, the same size as certain areas of my plate with the Japanese paper and doing the same method. I started digitally printing on my chine colle papers, so just using a Thai kozo paper, really cheap, that I bought from Blick, running it through the digital printer with these flat patterns, and then printing them with my etchings that had this kind of drapery volume that had this sort of push and pull between flat and volume. And then the last method I'll show you is kind of incorporating relief and intaglio together. You can call it a top roll, some people call it a surface roll, and basically we're just going to roll a really transparent colored ink on top of our inked etching, which just adds a little bit of tint or color to our background. And this is always a fun thing to do, is to print your etching like a relief block. And if you get really close, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but you can actually see all the little raised lines of the etching. So something that you'll need to do ahead of time if you're wanting to do the chine colle method is to prepare your papers. So there's a wet and a dry method of chine colle. I found that when I was doing these really strategic areas of chine colle, that when I did the wet method, it tended to bunch or smudge the ink. So I kind of found that the dry method worked better for me because I can kind of position it on my plate. There's a lot of holding your breath and hoping that the piece of paper doesn't blow away, but I found this was a little bit better for positioning these small pieces of paper on my plate. So I'm going to show you what I do to prepare my paper in advance. So you'll need methyl cellulose. This is a plant-based glue, and I just prepared it as per the instructions on the back by mixing this powder with water and letting it sit overnight. And I usually make a big jug of it so I can use it whenever I need it. So I'm going to use this and just a cheap chip brush and a piece of plexiglass. And usually you would want your plexiglass to be cleaner than this, but this is what I have to work with. And then for chine colle, you want to use a really thin, translucent paper because you still want to see your etched lines on top of the paper. And I find, I'm going to show you using this Nepalese paper that I have a lot of. But I tend to not really like those thick lines in the surface of the paper because I find them a little bit distracting. The paper that I really like to use is called Matsuo Kozo. So this is a piece of paper that I have already prepared You can kind of see that shininess on the back. So that is the methyl cellulose that has dried to the back. And when we run it through the press with our dampened paper, the dampened paper reactivates this dried glue and glues it to our paper. So I'm going to show you how to get to this point. But you can see that this paper is really lovely, really translucent, it's delicate, but it's strong because the fibers are super long. But this paper is also really expensive. I was buying it from the Japanese paper place in Toronto, and it was about $20 a sheet. I think you can still order from them or look on their website to find places that will distribute it. But the Matsuo Kozo was one of the papers that I really liked using due to its translucency and thinness. So to start, I'm going to take one of these sheets, maybe let's do this orange, and open up the methyl cellulose, if I can. Okay. And I'm going to glue it with the flat side down. So to start, I'm gonna lay some methyl cellulose down about the shape of the sheet that I'm preparing, and then I'm gonna lay the sheet down, make sure it lays flat. There we go, and then I'm going to apply another layer on top. And then you let it dry. But I'm gonna fill this space with another couple sheets before I let it dry. All right, so I'm gonna put this aside to let it dry. And I'm gonna show you one that I prepared earlier that has dried, but depending on your mixture, sometimes you need to do it a couple times. So like I did this little piece, but I can't even really see. I know that I was putting it on this side, but this one's not dry yet. And I've kind of peeled these up, but I can see that there's a little bit of glue. It's a little bit shiny, but I want it to be shinier because I want to make sure that when I do cut out the piece and glue it to my sheet that it is actually going to stay. Once your chine colle pieces have dried and have this nice shininess on the back, you're ready to start cutting your chine colle pieces in preparation for printing. So one method, if you want a piece of chine colle to cover the entirety of your plate, you'll want to cut it to the size of your plate. So a way to do that is to take your plate. You want to pay attention to which side the glue is on. So if you imagine when you're printing, you want the glue side to go against your paper, and then you're etching to print on top. And it doesn't really matter when you're actually cutting out the square because it should still be the same size as your plate. So I'm just using my plate as a guide out this piece. Alright, so now we have a piece of chine colle that should fit nicely on top of your plate. Let's say you want a piece of chine colle that we want to add a little bit of color to her hair like I did here. And then maybe we want to cut another piece for her handkerchief. What I do in this case is I'll take a proof. Usually I'll make a photocopy of it. And I'm going to use this as a guide to cut out and trace around the part that I want. And you can see I have lots of little bits of these papers. They're expensive, but you know, sometimes we're just using such a small amount of them that they last a long time. All right, so I just want to make sure I have enough space and I'm maximizing the use of my chine colle. I'm not doing it right in the middle. I'm doing it over here so that I have this extra space over here for future pieces. And again, I'm paying attention to which side the glue is facing. So I want to make sure that my glue is facing this way. So glue side down. Because your image does reverse when you print. So this can be really confusing. And you know, the thing that can happen is that you go to print and you cut out, you spent all this time cutting a bunch of little pieces that are facing the wrong way. So it's always good to double and triple check. So you can see that that's the outline of her hair, and now I'm going to cut it out. There is her hair. And sometimes I'll cut it a little bit bigger than I think it needs to be, because I feel like it's always better to have it bigger than to have it smaller. All right, and then we're going to cut a piece of this pink paper for her handkerchief. So there's her little handkerchief. And her hair. And we've got a little piece of blue that we're gonna do. You know, these are very like precise methods of doing it, but you can be playful. Here's a couple examples where I just cut out flowers and collage them onto the plate. And then here's one where I don't really like where that flower is placed, but you know, you can cut things out of the chine colle to create little windows. I already have this one cut, so I'm gonna see what happens when I chine colle that down, because there again will be little peoples in here. So you can be playful with collage, but you can also be strategic with your use of color. All right, so once you have these cut out, you're ready to make sure that you soak your paper and you're ready to start inking your plate. And if you're doing an edition, you know, you'll want to cut these pieces of paper out ahead of time. So I always end up with a bunch of these little envelopes or baggies with all these weird shapes of paper in them, just to keep them together so that they don't get lost or crumpled. All right, so I'm just gonna ink and wipe my plate normally with black ink. All right, so our plate is inked and ready to be printed. So we're gonna start with our solid color. All right, so we've placed our plate down And then we're gonna make sure that we're placing our chine colle with the glue side up. And then I soaked the paper for about 20 minutes, and I'm gonna blot it between these two towels just to get that sheen off, but I don't want it too dry because the wetness from our paper is going to reactivate the dried glue on the back of our chine colle paper. All right, so I'm gonna double check to make sure it's in the place that I want it. And then it's easier sometimes if you're actually using a registration guide, but I'm just gonna drop this down on top. Newsprint, and then I'm gonna run it through the press. And here it is with a blue background. All right, and then we ink it again. We place the plate down again. This time we take our pieces of chine colle, again making sure that they're glue side up. Trying to fit it in as best you can. Sometimes they get a little bendy, and I sort of bend them back down so that they lay as flat as possible. Hopefully you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of wind or air. It'll blow these little pieces away. And this is sometimes where you'll realize that you put the wrong side down, but hopefully you did it right and things will line up. Trying to get it to sit as best it can. All right, and then I'm gonna go blot our paper, and this is the tricky part, placing it down without moving anything. And then we'll hope for the best. And there she is. So now I'm going to show you how to do a top roll or a surface roll or a relief roll on top of an etching. And I like to do this with as transparent an ink as possible. So I use this tint-based litho ink, which I use for a lot of things. And I'm gonna make a kind of like pink color, so I have this red. So I'm gonna take some of the transparent base, and then you really just need the smallest amount because this is super pigmented ink. Honestly, like the more saturated you go, the more difficult it is to see your lovely etched lines. And remembering again that you can always go more opaque, it's hard to go more transparent because you have to add a lot more transparency. So we're just going to start with a very minimal amount of red. Mix that in there. I'm going to test the transparency on this piece of scrap paper by doing a drawdown. That is, that's perfect. I wouldn't go any more saturated than that. And the reason we do a drawdown is because when we're applying ink, especially rolling on such a thin layer, this is how it's going to look on our paper rather than like this. So we always do like a really thin drawdown just to check to see what the color is actually going to look like. And I think this is perfect. And then When picking your roller, you want to make sure that it's obviously larger than your plate, but you also want to make sure that you're going to be able to make a complete pass before your roller comes all the way back around again, or you're going to get a weird line. So how you can do that is, sometimes I look for a mark. In this case, there's like a piece of dried ink on the roller right there, and I'm going to place it next to my plate, kind of like put that piece of dried ink right before my plate starts, and I'm gonna roll it to see if the piece of ink makes a full revolution before it gets to the end of my plate. And it does not, so it'll work. So we're gonna roll this ink out. And then I'm going to ink my etching plate normally. So here's the tricky part. I'm going to ink my roller up again. And then I'm going to check to see, usually there's a kiss mark where, there it is, the last time you lifted off the ink. So I'm gonna start with that actually like right before my plate so that I don't get it on my plate. So I'm gonna press this down, making sure that my roller is, there's space on either side. And then I'm going to just roll it across the plate. And it's hard to see, but there is a thin layer of very transparent ink on the surface of my plate. And now we're gonna roll that through the press. And there she is, a lovely little tinted pink print. All right, so the next thing I'm gonna show you is the a la poupee inking technique. And the reason why it's called a la poupee is because traditionally they would use little rolled up bits of cloth that looked like little dolls. So poupee is doll in French, to apply ink to strategic areas. So this is an option for applying ink, but you can also just use smaller pieces of mat board to get the ink into the places where you want it. So I'm going to ink this plate up with blue and this phthalo green. And you want to make sure that you're using tarlatan that is the same color ink, which I didn't have, so I'm just going to go ahead and use this fresh tarlatan to clean my plate. All right. Try to focus. Here's my green. My blue, and then I'm gonna do, maybe I'll do her body green, her fins blue, and then her face black, and we'll see what that looks like. So I'm gonna start by, maybe I'll take the black, ink up her face. tonality in green. And it gets tricky to get clear delineations between colors. So sometimes what I've seen people do is blend with their finger so that there's kind of a smoother transition. Alright, so now I'm going to wipe this color. And now I'm going to ink everywhere else up in blue, including the background. So it does get a little bit monoprinty, but we'll see what this looks like. Alright, so not bad. I think what you do need to be careful of is making sure that you ink everywhere. So it looks like here I missed this little part, and in her fin I missed that little part. But other than that, I don't hate it. This is inking something in the poupee method.